Well, joining me to discuss this is Junior Smart, who's the founder of SOS Project at St Giles Trust, an organisation which works with young people who are at risk of being exploited through gangs and violence. A very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us. Now, this report makes for very stark reading today that it is now the norm for children as young as 9 years old to run drugs for gangs in England. Is that really the case? Is it that prevalent?
Yeah, definitely. We've certainly seen an increase in young people being groomed. I think we had a lot of things that was happening at the same time. So, for example, you had COVID, which meant that a lot more people were being isolated. Therefore, a lot more young people were going online. And they, unfortunately, the way that these groups are recruiting now, they have embraced technology in a way that many of the statutory services have been slow to keep up. So, we've certainly seen, every incidence of violence, there has been an online presence both before and afterwards. We've seen these organised criminal groups putting out messages, attracting, grooming young people through online sources. And then couple that with the austerity and the cost of the living crisis, what you've got is a lack of availability of choice for many families that were already suffering. And what happens to those households where the adults have to work more hours? Unfortunately, there's less of a parental presence. And so young people have been more likely to be attracted and groomed into these negative cycles. And that part of it is very common. I think as far as the ages are concerned, none of us should really be surprised. How often is it that we've worked with someone and we said, well, actually, we should have put in an intervention, perhaps even before that child was even born. So really, the key thing here is how can we get to these young people earlier? How can we put in preventative measures to stop young people being groomed and being exploited and falling into these negative traps?
And you have first-hand experience. I read your bio last night where you describe how a culmination of negative choices led to you being sentenced to 12 years in prison originally for a drug-related offence. What would have helped you? What would have potentially been, what would you like to have seen there to have caught you from some of those negative choices?
Well, for me, one of the key things that was missing was the lack of a positive role model, somebody that I could relate to. And that's exactly what we're trying to do now through SOS and SOS Plus. So through our services, we use people with lived experience, people that have got first-hand experience of the realities that these young people are facing. And then, for example, for SOS Plus, we're going into schools, colleges, community centres, pupil referral units, and really trying to impart real tools that the young people can use straight away in order to make better lifestyle choices. One of the key things here is relatability. How many people do you see in positions of authority that the young people can relate to? And that's exactly what we're trying to get at. When we go into schools and we open up a clear space and we're asking young people, what do you know about this? What do you know about county lines? What do you know about this? And they realise it's a safe space. Oh my gosh, they start asking us questions. They want to know what the reality is. And that gives us a really strong edge to get across to the young people what to do better, the traps they need to avoid, and also who they can trust, who they can turn to in these situations. Young people are faced with a marriage of information and misinformation. And I really do feel sorry for the young people now because they're over-enforced and underprotected. And we need to be better at how we serve and support them.
And it's not just about county lines where children are drawn into running drugs for older gangs. Young people around the country, often from deprived areas, are drawn to gangs in general. There's high crime, some carry weapons, some die during these kind of gang feuds. What needs to be done to lift young people out of that?
Oh, wow. That's a massive question. I think the solutions are going to be very, very complex. If you look at the figures, often we're working with people that are both victims and perpetrators. So the same person who might be carrying a knife today for protection, they could have been a victim 2 weeks ago. Now, the reality of this is how much of that victim element is actually taken into account at the point of arrest. The problem is with many of the services that are overstretched and under-resourced, which all leads to quick fixes and improper solutions. So at the point of arrest where a young person's been, say, for example, caught with a knife or caught with drugs, they are treated purely and simply as a perpetrator. None of the other factors, we know, for example, these groups capture these kids through things like debt bondage. So that drugs that will be confiscated and that kid will be arrested for, that will create a debt. That means that kid isn't going to get away with it. That means that kid is now going to have to work for free. And all that's happening is we're treating what we see as the symptom, actually as the cause at that point, rather than taking into account all of the other factors. And this makes the situation worse. What that young person often needs is support. What that young person often needs is support for their family. They might need that guidance at that lowest point to get out, and that's just not being addressed. And we just see the same thing with school exclusions. I think that came up in the report, and we know that school exclusions is a massive link to the negative cycle that leads to criminal behaviour. And we need to be better. We need to be better as a society. The government needs to address the underlying issues here more, because they're the sort of things that create this negative cycle that mean that problems like this will not go away.
Junior Smart, we really appreciate your thoughts and insight. Thank you so much for joining us, and best of luck with your work.
Thank you so much.